So moving on, and I've just, yep, here we go. The software is working with me now. So as we've introduced ourselves, I'm Jenny. I'm an analyst at Delta Energy and Environment, and I've got Jon Slowe on the line.
Hello, everyone.
So interestingly, and for those of you who logged in last time, I was joined by Nigel. He was dialing in from the south of, so the middle of England. And interestingly, Jon is now dialing in from Glasgow. So usually we are the team's based in Edinburgh. But because we're getting out and about, we're remotely dialing in together to deliver the webinar today. So, and just to note that we have some webinars, future webinars. We do quite a range of different public webinars. This is actually the last in the series before the summer break, and then we will be back in September with our home energy management webinar on the 5th of September, and the third in this series on the 13th of September.
So we'll get started by diving straight into some of our key findings about the business models from the focusing on the timing of energy demand or energy generation. And this slide sums up the three different business models that through looking at many tens of companies, several tens of companies in this area, we've identified these three fundamental business models. And you can see on the top right, today we see lots of companies aggregating flexibility from a number of customers, monetizing that flexibility, typically or often with the TSO by providing ancillary or balancing services, and then sharing some of that revenue with the customer. Interestingly, we see two other business models, which you can see from the other two blue boxes on the bottom left, where we see less activity today, but a lot of potential for future growth in the next years. One of them, the first one, where companies provide software or services to customers to help them optimize the timing of their consumption or the state of charge of their battery or when they're generating themselves. And right at the bottom left, something we think there will be a lot of value and a lot of activity in the future, where energy suppliers optimize their cost base in procuring energy by shaping customers' demand and use that to provide lower cost energy supply to customers. So we'll be going into these in more detail, but our philosophy in our research and how we report that is to put the meatballs on top, or to put the key findings up front. So that whets your appetite a bit for what we'll be talking about in the rest of the webinar.
Fantastic, thank you, Jon. So if we just run over a quick agenda for the webinar. First, we will have an introduction to Delta. Then we will go on to talk about time-of-use optimization and the three different business models approaches that Jon has outlined. We'll then take a look at some specific examples of companies and business models that are in the market today. We'll look at who is doing what and which business models are gaining traction with the different customers. And then finally, we will come on to the customer. As we all know, they must be at the heart of any business model. You must be addressing a customer pain or delivering a customer benefit. So we'll have a look at the end users and how they are engaging with the various different innovations and business models. And then finally, as we mentioned, we really like to engage with the participants today. So we'll have some polls throughout the webinar, and we'll also come at the end to questions and answers. So feel free to note down any questions or comments throughout the webinar, and then we will make some time at the end to come back to them.
Just a reminder, you can use the questions or the chat boxes on the right-hand side of your webinar to ask us questions or communicate with us at any time.
Okay, So I know we have quite a lot of familiar faces on the line, but for those of you who do not know us quite as well, Delta Energy and Environment, we're based up in Edinburgh, and we are a research consultancy, and it's our mission to help the companies that we work with transition from what we call the old energy landscape to new energy. So here we mean a distributed, low carbon landscape where the propositions are moving towards a service orientated and more customer centric delivery approach. On the left, you can see our bubble diagram, and this essentially summarizes where our core expertise lies and the focus of our research and our consultancy. And this is firmly with the end user and the customer. So we look at B2C and we also look at B2B. We look at the different technologies that come into the homes, the different devices that customers are using, the different ways that they are reacting with demand response and flexibility, for example. And then also we've increasingly found that there's a lot of interest clearly from the networks and the grid side of the energy landscape, because what happens at the customer end of the meter is increasingly impacting and becoming very relevant for the networks. Moving on to our business model and how we work with people, we essentially have two approaches. We're a consultancy, so we have on the bottom part of this slide here our bespoke consultancy that we do for different clients. But this research today and the bulk of our work is actually in our research subscription services. So this is where we focus on a certain topic and we produce a body of work that clients will subscribe to over the year. And we have structured this into three clusters. So we've got our heat research, our digital research, and our distributed generation and flexibility research. And then where the work today that we will focus on sits is overarching across these three different topics, because we are looking at the business models and the customer propositions that span these different areas, but we'll be drawing heavily and we work with the teams who look at specifically in connected homes, energy storage and flexibility for the topic of this webinar, because this webinar is focused on the timing of energy generation and consumption. So these are the research services that we've been working closely with to develop the insight that we'll share some of that with you today. I'll now pass over to Jon to talk through the structure of the business model research service in particular.
Thanks, Jenny. So only about another minute to go before we get through the introduction and into the content. Our business model research. So we hear lots of our customers, energy companies, technology companies, product manufacturers, understanding that they need to evolve their business model, that their traditional business model might not be fit for the future, but still, and this may chime well with you individually, a lot of confusion or lack of clarity on what the winning business models will be in the future. So what we're doing to help on this is on the left-hand side, looking at large numbers of innovators in the market who are creating new business models, new initiatives, working with customers, often at a very early stage. Then in the middle box, you can see we synthesize that into 6 fundamental different business models. So we think pretty much everything fits into one of these 6 boxes in the middle. And then on the right-hand side, looking at, okay, what can we strategically infer from how the market's changing, in what way it's changing, and who is gaining traction with new energy in the downstream part of the European energy sector.
Fantastic. So as Jon said, that just gives you a flavour for where we're coming from. But now if we get into the content of the webinar, those of you who joined us for the first one will remember that we focused on marketplace operations. and that this one is clearly on our time of use optimization. But we just quickly wanted to contextualize the two topic areas with regards to the fact that we see 6 key new energy business model approaches where the plethora, literally hundreds of different business models are out there with regards to new energy. There's lots and lots going on. There's a huge sea of innovation. But we have distilled that down and identified 6 key categories to characterize all this activity. So we'll be delving down into one of these, the time of use optimization. And essentially, this is where business models, regardless of the precise technology that's used, so if it's load and capacity, or if it's distributed generation, or if it's storage, we're looking at the way in which value is monetized through the use of these different flexible technologies. To get a view from yourselves, though, it will be we've come up with a couple of polls, just very quick fire questions to kind of engage the audience now. So I'll launch the first one. This should come up in your browser. So I will do that now.
Don't worry, it's completely confidential. We have no way of knowing who voted for which option.
So in this question, we're asking, what percentage of customers do you think will have the timing of energy consumption? So on a regular basis, on an ongoing regular basis, what percentage of customers will have this timing of the energy consumption managed for them, or will manage it themselves in 5 years' time? Fantastic. Okay, so we've got most people have voted already. We've got 86% already. So yeah, thinking there's no need to kind of consider the different customer segments in great detail. It's just kind of a feel for the market that you're in, and the percentage of customers that you think will have the timing of their energy consumption managed or manage it themselves.
This is the first of 4 polls, so we've got another 3 polls to come.
Fantastic.
Okay, Jenny, we ready to publish the results?
Yeah, absolutely. So I will do that now. And that should now come up on your screen. So as you can see,
so yeah, quite a variety. I think everyone tends to be in the middle on these polls, and that's the case here. So people thinking that a substantial proportion of customers will be optimizing themselves or other parties doing this for them, their timing of their energy consumption in 5 years' time. So that, in a way, highlights the importance of understanding what business models companies can use to create value in this new aspect or relatively new aspect of the energy market.
Absolutely. Okay. Now I will launch the second poll, which I will just select on the software and launch it now. So this question is focusing on residential customers and thinking about when will 20% of residential customers have the timing of their energy managed or manage it for themselves. Do we think that will be in the near term? So by 2020, in 1 to 3 years, 20% of residential customers will be engaged with this, or a slightly longer term, 4 to 6 years, or much longer, sort of on the 10-year horizon, or longer than 10 years, or actually 20% of residential customers. That's too much.
Are you a skeptic and don't believe it will ever happen? So again, don't worry about what market you're thinking about. Just answer it as best you can. It's completely confidential. How are we doing with the results, Jenny?
We have 83% have voted. So we have a clear winner again. For those of you who haven't voted, if you could take the time just to quickly, and then in 10 seconds, I'll close the poll. We've got 90% have voted, and okay, I'll close that and I'll share the results with you. So again, you can see.
So,
Sorry, Jon.
unsurprisingly, I think it's not much is going to happen. People think in the next few years, but in the 2020s, over 70% of people think that a fifth of customers will have their timing of energy consumption managed for them. Some think, interestingly, 1 in 5 think it will take longer than that. So residential is less active today and in a way is harder, but there are companies already doing this in a few markets, which we'll come on to very shortly.
Fantastic. Okay. So let's have a look now at the 3 business model approaches that we have identified within this space. We'll go through these each in turn to give you more of an understanding around our thinking and insight. And then we can discuss how this has this influences towards the thinking today of the polls as well.
Okay, so the first business model is sometimes referred to as an aggregator model. Companies, and most of this activity is with industrial and commercial customers. Companies will typically, or aggregators will go to a company and say, if you allow us to turn things up or down a bit, or fire up your backup generators, for example, then we can monetize that flexibility, typically with the TSO, and we'll share some of that revenue with you.
And there is, as Jon says, that there's a lot of companies that are active in this space. Here we've listed some of the more newer to market entrants.
Okay. The second business model is an energy supplier model, where the energy supplier uses their ability to shape customers' demand to reduce the cost of purchasing energy on the market, simplistically. So they're effectively monetizing that customer flexibility through reducing or optimizing their timing of purchasing of energy on the market, and then sharing the value back with the customer through a lower tariff.
And there are fewer examples of companies doing this today. It's a much newer, embryonic way of sharing value with the customer through monetizing flexibility. We'll go into Innovatio in a little bit more detail later in the webinar.
And this isn't easy, as some of you will know. Tempest is a UK startup that tried to do this and then failed. So with innovation, a lot of brave innovators don't unfortunately make it, but you can learn a lot from looking at what they've done and how they've gone about it. The last model is where we see a lot of already some activity where the price signal effectively trickles down to the customer. Or customers are able to access the value either directly or relatively directly. And companies can work with these customers to help them optimize the timing of their own consumption. So it may often be a software as a service type model.
Absolutely. And again, there are fewer examples than the first kind of aggregator business model. But there's a wider range of players who we see as kind of increasingly active and interested in this space. So you've got suppliers like EDP in Portugal or RWE in Germany with their Shine proposition. But you've also got software developers and kind of hardware manufacturers as well. So that's kind of a particularly interesting space at the moment.
We've just got a question in on the polls, actually. What's the percentage of customers today on where they are either someone's controlling the timing of their consumption? What percentage of customers today are having their flexibility monetized? And the answer is definitely less than 5%. It varies a bit from market to market. Some markets it's pretty much non-existent, apart from small numbers of very large energy users like steel mills. Other markets there are tens of thousands, but it's still very small as a percentage.
Mm-hmm. And that leads nicely on to the next slide that we're going to talk about, which links back to the key message that Jon introduced at the start with regards to the comparison between the different business models and their current market maturity. But then looking as to how that develops into the future. So if we take the aggregator business model first, we see this business model as it's already the most mature in the market today. We see lots of new entrants with new ideas around route to market or using different technologies to tap into customer on-site flexibility and then generate revenue from that and share it with the customer. But we see it likely a consolidation between these existing players and these new players that are coming into the space. Having a look at the low-cost energy supply, so the business model where the customer is having their load or their generation managed for them, again by a third party, but they're receiving in return a lower cost tariff. We see this business model gaining traction with customers because it's very, for one of the reasons here would be it's very simple for end users to grasp the concept. They're simply being provided a lower cost energy tariff. So there's nothing sort of fancy or complex for them to get their head around. And they don't necessarily have to accept more risk. That really lies with the supplier and the provider of that service.
It does require, though, a very low cost or easy way to control customers' consumption or the stated charge of their battery. There are increasing number of ways to do this with the rise of connectivity and connected homes. And I think in the next years, and certainly by the 2020s, there will be ample opportunity to shape customers' demand through the stated charge of their battery, the timing of their electric heating, the timing of their electric vehicle charging, or other smaller loads as well.
Yeah, so we expect to see suppliers becoming increasingly active in this space and shaping customer profiles. Moving on to the third business model type, and again we see this playing a much bigger role in the future. And linking into Jon just mentioned connectivity, but also the increase in time of use and dynamic price signals, because this business model sort of relies on the customer being having access or being exposed to those signals, and then using a software or hardware to respond to the different signals. Clearly, customers are not going to spend lots and lots of time doing this and invest lots of time on that side of it. It needs to be convenient, and so that's where automation comes in. And so you're able to optimize that self-consumption or that self-generation against increasingly sophisticated algorithms and data analytics. So as connectivity and these kind of mega trends come increasingly to the market, this enables this business model to gain some traction and kind of penetrate into customers and the offerings that they're able to procure.
We've got a lot of questions coming in, so apologies if we don't get to them all, but we will follow up with you afterwards to answer the questions if we don't get a chance to do that on the webinar. One question about the x-axis on this slide, whether it should be, in fact, smart metering penetration rather than market maturity. And for sure, if the price signal is to trickle down to customers, then well, at least for hourly tariffs, smart meters are essential. There are other price signals apart from the hourly tariff, but the hourly tariffs will be the easier price signals. So yes, as smart meters get rolled out in a number of countries, then that will enable companies to launch business models more readily than in some cases they can at the moment.
Okay. So if we move to have a look at these three business models in a bit more detail themselves.
Thanks, Jenny. So to look at what we often refer to as an aggregator model. So if you click the next button, Jenny, then there's, in some ways, this is not a new business model. Companies who are very large energy users, like steel mills, have been working directly with system operators to provide ancillary services or flexibility. What's new is the move to larger numbers of smaller loads, backup generators, batteries at everything from hospitals to hotels to supermarkets, and even down to nursing homes and residential homes. So in our recent flexibility multi-client study, we've gone into a lot of depth on these innovation themes that you see on the slide. And on the right-hand side, we show just some of the companies who are active with this aggregator business model. And they really range from to some energy suppliers, spin-off of a telco, and these companies are working across the spectrum of some with residential loads. TECO with heat pumps in Switzerland has several thousand heat pumps on their platform and using that to sell balancing services to the TSO. Many with industrial and commercial customers, and some of them with quite innovative approaches to minimize transaction costs and on-site hardware costs. So what surprised us is how crowded this market how quickly this market has become quite crowded in some countries. You expose a price signal and there's no shortage of companies diving in there to try and create businesses on the back of that.
Which is in contrast to the next two business models, which we've mentioned are the space is currently less crowded. So if we have a look at the low-cost supply model, where a third party, a supplier, is managing the customer's load for them. A particularly interesting example is Innovatio, who are over in Italy. And essentially they're a hybrid between an ESCO and an energy supplier. So they supply customers with energy, but they also involved in the energy efficiency and site optimization space, which means they procure finance from third parties to install these different measures. And they've also entered the German market, and they're active in the first business model that Jon mentioned with regards to monetizing flexibility through the TSO. But what makes them really interesting and relevant to this category is the fact that they work with customers to optimize the customer's position against market prices. So Innovatio manage the customer's energy, their consumption, and if they have generation on site, and they optimize this against the different price signals on the market, and then are able to therefore pass through a lower cost of supply. So that's one of the first steps that we see suppliers taking to offer such business models to customers. Having a look then at the third example, and again, a specific company business who is active in this space. And again, a particularly interesting example is EDP in Portugal. So they're an incumbent energy utility, and so they certainly have their traditional relationship with the customer, where they supply energy and the customer pays them for that. That's based on selling as many kilowatt hours as possible. That's kind of a traditional utility business model. However, they have launched a new offering, which they call Ready. So this is their Ready Controls piece, which also comes with solar PV, so the self-generation side of things. Customers can also procure and buy batteries in combination with the controls and the self-generation. But essentially, this piece is enabling customers to increasingly become more self-sufficient. And so going against the traditional legacy business model that is to sell as many kilowatt hours as possible, they're actually helping customers to increasingly meet their own needs on site. So it's an interesting example of business model that is moving to empower customers with the tools to enable them to optimize their own timing of energy consumption. If we then move to Jon is going to give us a bit of an insight into the customers and the end users who are engaging with these three different types of business models.
Thanks, Jenny. So when we've been looking at these tens of companies that we've highlighted in the slides, where we always start is the customer and what's in it for the customer. And in some ways, I think flexibility is a bit of a rubbish customer proposition, because what you're saying to customers are actually, it's not only about using energy when you as a customer need it. We want to change that so you use energy not only when you need it, but when there's value for the electricity system. So it's not actually addressing a fundamental customer need, but you can then share that value back with the customer that you get from asking them to use energy in a slightly different way than they normally would. However, there are companies doing this successfully and who have developed some really exciting customer propositions. In this slide, we're going to look across the three different models and just compare and contrast them according to a few criteria. So the level of customer involvement. And this is a bit of a generalization. Whenever you're trying to simplify, you risk generalizing. But you can see here we've characterized the customer involvement on the right-hand side is quite high because the customer needs to buy a service or a product or an offering that optimizes their own consumption. Now, that may be automated, so the customer may not be involved in an ongoing basis, but at least to instigate it, the customer's involvement is high. On the left-hand side, the customer needs to negotiate with an aggregator and sign up to an aggregation deal. In the middle, the customer basically signs up to a tariff. So while there may be some optimization of their consumption, it's relatively low engagement. And on the customer outlay, you can see here this will typically be low or zero on the left. And on the right, the customer's paying all of the cost of the optimizing software or service. And if we move down to risk and exposure to flexibility values, then this is, I think, really interesting that on the right, the customer's taking that risk and that exposure themselves, whereas in the middle, there's very little exposure to the customer. It's the energy supplier taking that risk. And there's not a right or a wrong here. I think certain customers will have certain mindsets about how much risk they want to take. Certain companies will have different willingness to have exposure to that risk. But I think there's a key consideration in how much risk and where that risk should lie. And then lastly, the control of the assets, again, is interesting. On the right, it's fundamentally the customer, but in the middle and the left, it's a third party. So building up trust and credibility with a customer is absolutely critical here. So rattle through that just so we try and keep to time. We then move on to a couple more questions for you.
Yeah, absolutely. So the third poll that we've got, following on from essentially our introduction of these three different business model approaches, we've got the question around, of these three business models, which ones do you think will come to dominate the market in 5 years' time? So that poll should have appeared on the screen, yeah, and people have started voting.
And again, remember, it's completely confidential. We can't see who's voting for what.
So, okay, and again, this really interestingly, we've got about 60% of people have voted, and there is a clear winner again, with one of the three business models is taking a lead.
You're teasing people, Jenny, by not saying which it is.
Not
wanting to influence the last people voting.
We've now got nearly 90% of people who have voted. So model 2 has attracted the most attention. If I just leave it open a couple more seconds, if anyone else anyone else in the final 10% interested to vote? Okay, and I'll just close that and share with you the results.
Okay, very interesting. So the market today is very much at model 1, and 20% of people think that will stay the case. But half of people think that energy suppliers will be able to extract the most value. And I think we would probably agree to some, well, we can see that the value from flexibility so far has been primarily from balancing services and maybe demand charges. Model 2 enables energy suppliers to exploit value from energy markets. And while this isn't so active today, sometimes because market settlement processes don't allow or create some barriers for this, then we certainly know from our work with our clients a lot of interest in Model 2, and that's reflected in what people think. But equally, we can see some very interesting propositions for Model 3, where price signals move down to the customer and customers can take more of the value themselves.
Yeah, so I think it'll be an interesting question for, and we'll certainly be looking into that around the reception that different customer segments have to these different business models, because Model 2 and 3 are fundamentally very different from the customer's point of view. So we'll certainly be having a look at the traction that different business models get, and the kind of lessons learned that they experience with regards to offering these propositions to the market, because they're very new at the moment. Okay.
So on the next slide, this is the bit of, I guess, quid pro quo in return for sharing some of our insight. We're interested to know whether you're interested in our research on this topic, and what our new energy business model service does is, on an ongoing basis, track, analyze, and synthesize all of the innovation in this space. So it is a very dynamic area, and under our research service, we provide value for our subscribers in helping to track that innovation, understand what's working, why it's working, what's not working, why it didn't work, what lessons can you draw from that, and help companies develop their own innovation activities, new business models in this area. So no obligation to tick either box here, but it does help us understand who may be interested to learn more about the work we're doing.
Fantastic. Okay, well, majority of people have voted. I can leave it open a couple more seconds. It would be 1 minute. But that's really useful indication for us. So thank you very much. Okay, I'll just close that. So finally, just to wrap up, I think Jon's just going to summarize the content that we've gone through today. And again, a phrase at Delta that we use is meatballs on top. So the key messages that to take away from the webinar today.
Thanks, Jenny. So I can build an answer to one question into this as well. There's not a right or a wrong here. It depends. The right business model will depend on your customers, whether B2B, B2C. It will depend on your market. It will depend on the regulatory structures. But I think it will help in terms of clarity of thought to understand the three fundamental different business models and the different companies who are active here, what they're doing, what they're learning, what's working, what's not working. There's a general recognition, and I think backed up by the polls on this webinar, that the value will increasingly shift from the quantity of energy use to the timing of energy use. And the winners in the market will be the ones that develop successful business models on the back of that. So we hope this webinar has helped you in your thinking and spark some new ideas, maybe confirm some thinking, given you some new perspectives.
Wonderful. So that leads on just to a quick sort of refresh reminder of the 6 categories that we've identified to kind of help to navigate this space. And we're currently looking at energy as a service. So the third pillar or a category that we're looking at in depth. and that will be the topic of our third webinar that we do in this series.
Thanks, Jenny. And on the last slide, we're always keen to talk with our network, to exchange perspectives, to hear challenge, to share our thinking. So please don't hesitate to get in touch with Jenny, who is managing the research on our new energy business model service. Sign up to our podcasts and feel free to share this webinar when we send the recording around with your colleagues. We're delighted to talk with you whenever you have questions for us or to exchange perspectives. And thanks for your time on the webinar. We know time's valuable. We hope it was a good use of your time. And we look forward to you joining us for future webinars.
Fantastic. Okay. Well, we have taken. We try to keep these sort of about half an hour, 35 minutes. We've taken a little bit longer. So hopefully that's kind of been useful. If we take a couple of minutes just to have a quick look at the questions that have come through. John, you've done a good job on addressing some of them already.
Oh, and I just see we had a listener from New Zealand. So Terry, very glad you could join us. There's one question about the cost of the flexibility of local electricity production and the cost of putting it on the grid. I think we've already seen a number of models around combined heat and power plants and optimizing their generation, often to maximize self-consumption, but also with a volatility of energy prices on the market, sometimes to export power to the grid. So we don't see a fundamental, well, in many cases, there are not fundamental barriers about getting electricity back onto the grid. And there's already a number of business models we can signpost you to where this is happening. And a final question on UK suppliers who are offering business model 2. Hardly any at the moment. It was interesting for us to see OVO Energy, a second-tier energy supplier, acquire an aggregation platform. And if you put 2 and 2 together, then you could conclude that OVO Energy is looking at business model 2. So we expect to see a lot more of it in the future, not so much today.
Yeah, with our comment earlier around Tempest Energy and their business model approach essentially being in model 2, and for a variety of different reasons not being successful at the moment with the current market structure and the current market dynamics, but you know, they just exited the market because they feel that it's not appropriate timing and that they're not able to maximize the opportunity that that maybe initially thought that there was. But that certainly doesn't mean that in time, similar business models, we certainly see them coming back and looking to move forward. So yeah, while it's not particularly active at the moment, it's certainly a space that we know lots of people are sort of thinking about and exploring.
Great. I think we better draw it to a close there. We're at 45 minutes. So thanks all for your time. We'll send around recordings. We'll get back to you if we haven't answered your questions, and please feel free to get in touch. Thanks very much for your time, everyone.
Fantastic. Thanks, everyone. Have a good day.
Bye-bye.